and gentlemen, welcome to the Refined Savage podcast. We have another wonderful, fantastic, beautiful episode for you today. We're going to do some business first. That's the way we always do things. We get these sponsors. Hey, you guys need to be patronizing these sponsors. I want to make sure these guys are being taken care of. If you love the show, hey, take care of the people who are taking care of you. Let's start with Viking Coffee today. My boy, my brother, Evan Armstrong is killing it. New place where he's brewing and new stores that are selling Viking coffee. I'm seeing it in coffee shops. Hey, he's got the best stuff around. VikingCoffeeCo.com. I suggest you check out Old Man Strength, which is the brew from the show here, but all his flavors are fantastic. Give him a holler at VikingCoffeeCo.com. While you're there, get a hat and a mug and whatever else he has. I think he's got t-shirts for sale now, too, that are pretty sweet. So check him out. Use the code VikingCoffee10 at checkout. Ken at Cerberus Strength wants you to know that he's got your back. If you are a Highland Games athlete, the season is fast approaching. You need knee sleeves, you need tacky, you need elbow sleeves. Whatever you need, they've got your back at Cerberus Strength. Strongman, you guys already know that Cerberus is the best in the business. Anything you need for your strength journey, whether it's tacky, whether it's straps or wraps, belts, anything like that, Cerberus is your answer. Cerberus-strength.us. Use the code REFINEDSAVAGE10 at checkout. Nancy at Warrior CBD has the best stuff out there. If you guys have messaged Nancy on Instagram, you get on Instagram at the Warrior CBD site, give her a holler. She can answer all your questions. I'm not the expert on CBD. I know what I use. I can tell you what I use, but she's really the one that can help you out. So check them out on Instagram. Follow them while you're there. She's got a great Instagram page. Ask any questions you might have, and then go to warriorcbdofficial.com. Use the code WARRIOR20 off at checkout. It's the best CBD oil around. I promise you won't be disappointed. Serious Steel. Hey, Chad Clark got me hooked up with these guys. Wow. Excuse me. It's been a while now, and I couldn't be happier with them. Serious Steel is the place to go. They have everything you need. If you are trying to outfit a commercial gym, a studio, a home gym, garage gym, CrossFit gym, whatever you need, they have everything you could possibly want and more. I love going to their site. I just bought a hand gripper a couple weeks ago. I think I mentioned it on the show, and I love it. It sits right next to my chair. I squeeze that thing all day long, and my grip strength is getting better. Really cool product. I really like it a lot. Head on over to their website, SeriousSteel.com. Use the code SAVAGE at checkout for 10% off. Stay Classy Meats. If you are hunting your own meats, you need to find ways to enjoy meats that are humanely processed, and Stay Classy Meats are your people. These animals are living their best lives. Bozeman, Montana, they're up there eating the grass and drinking the water. No hormones. They're raised properly and butchered humanely, and the taste is out of this world. Let me tell you guys, if you haven't had their bacon or their bison yet, those are my two favorites. But man, I love their steaks too. Those are awesome too, now that I think of it. Hey, head on over to their website. Check out. If anybody has questions, give me a holler. I'll tell you what my personal favorites are, and we'll help you build a box. But they've got so many options for ordering meat. Check them out at StayClassyMeats.com. Use the code SAVAGE at checkout for 10% off. Impact Mouth Guards. Impact Mouth Guards, if you are in any kind of contact sport, you need to have a mouth guard. And not just some cheap, janky mouth guard that you put in boiling water in your kitchen. You need a mouth guard that's going to protect not only your teeth, but your brain pan. You hear me stuttering and mumbling through these intros and podcasts, and a lot of that I think has to do with the fact that I had too many concussions as a high school football player. So you want to make sure you're protecting your mouth, you're protecting your head. Get yourself a custom-made mouth guard, and then they put the cool stuff on it too, dollar signs and words and whatever you want on your mouth guard they can help you out with. And then if you're like a teeth grinder at night, or if you're a lifter who needs to lift more weight, mouth guards are the way to go. Check them out at impactmouthguards.com. Use the code REFINEDSAVAGE at checkout. That's capital REFINE, capital SAVAGE, 15% off. Finally today, the beard struggle. If you have a big, giant mountain man beard, got to keep that thing looking and smelling fresh. Don't let it get nappy looking. Get in there with some beard balms, beard oils. There's got beard straighteners and combs. Everything you need for that beard, they've got it at The Beard Struggle. Check them out at thebeardstruggle.com and use the code REFINESAVAGE, all lowercase, at checkout for 15% off. Today on the show, super psyched for this one. I went up to Ashland for the University of Ashland Strength and Conditioning Summit. You've heard us talk about it on the show. Got to sit down with Derek Woodske. Derek is an amazing dude. I never really got a chance to sit down and talk with him for any kind of length of time. I was super impressed with him. We sat down and talked for about 2 hours, and I think if he didn't have to speak that night, we probably would have talked for quite a while longer. But great dude, great podcast, man. Super interesting. I want you to share this one with your friends and family because I think that people will really enjoy this one. I got a huge respect for this dude, and I look forward to having him on the show more often. So sit back, relax with your Viking coffee, and we'll see you at the end. All right, finally, we have microphones working and ready to go. Derek Woodske, what's happening?
You know, everything and nothing.
Yeah. We are at Ashland for, we're both presenting this weekend for the Ashland Strength and Conditioning Seminar. And I'm so psyched because I think this is going to end up being like the premier strength and conditioning seminar.
Yeah, I would think so. In terms of a peer strength coaching perspective, there's a lot of people that have come together because with some of the other seminars that are going on right now, they're really vast in terms of what they're covering. So you could go to a seminar that could have a little bit of strength and a lot of motivation, or a little bit of motivation, a lot of strength. This is the first time that I've spoken since my days with Poliquin where I'm actually going to speak about strength and conditioning specifically in one of my talks. I will talk about goal setting, which I spoke on at Summer Strong 10, so I'll do that presentation tomorrow, but I haven't spoken purely about nuts and bolts theory stuff, or what I believe to be successful theories in my life, in almost a decade.
What's the one tonight?
So tonight I'm going to talk about exercise selection and concepts of periodization that I use.
Okay.
And, you know, the long and short of it is over the years I started to integrate a lot of the stuff that I learned from Judd, you know, which is kind of what brings us back here in some regard. You know, he's such a centering individual in the track and field strength and conditioning world. So I'll talk about what I use with Judd, talk a little bit what I use with, you know, Larry Judge back in the Wyoming days, because even though his systems were super high volume and had a very high attrition rate in terms of athlete health, there were still some concepts and principles that we pulled out of his systems that were successful, mostly the volume concepts. The idea, even if in the college setting in particular, you know, sort of the unspoken thing is if you have an athlete that has no development whatsoever in, say, the sport of hammer throw, and you have to get them to a high level very quickly, you kind of have to push them to that brink and see what breaks and see what doesn't break, and volume tends to be that. You know, so I'll talk a little bit about that, talk about my time with Poliquin, you know, because I did spend a lot of time with Charles on the road, as well as previous to that as an athlete. You know, I started working with Charles in terms of concepts in 2002. Didn't go to work for him as an instructor until 2010. You know, so I had a lot of experience with Charles as the non-salesman Charles, just the strength coach Charles, through Judd, as well as being his right hand for a lot of his course development for levels 1, 2, and 3, and a little bit into the biosig. So I saw all those worlds. And then, of course, when I went to work for Thomas Linsky and the Cleveland Browns in 2007, that's when I really got introduced to what we thought of as vertical integration, Charlie Francis stuff. And even though I'd used a lot of the conceptual stuff previous to that, I felt like that time in 07, 08, previous to Charles, even in 10, working for him, started to kind of put together my concepts that I would use as a coach in terms of learning how to integrate weight room, metabolic, rehab, prehab, etc., to a system that I could kind of stamp as something that if it was put out there, they'd be like, yeah, that system looks a lot like Derek probably uses. Is it a system that I created? No. Is it a system that I kind of shaved off a lot of stuff to get to something that I could replicate over and over again? Yeah. And that, I think, starts to become identifiable. You know, there's going to be conceptual stuff from Poliquin in there for sure, conceptual stuff from Charlie Francis, Judd Logan, a little bit from Larry Judge, and then my own sort of success and failures. And that's kind of my framework that I present tonight, is like, well, this is how I break down program design. In an hour, is it possible to pass all the information? No way. But at least I can be like, this is what I think the very first day I start writing a workout for someone.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it would give you know, we're all one of the things that I've found over the years is that we're all pirates in a little ways. We steal from everybody, and you know, you become an accumulation of all the people you've worked with over the time, and then grinding it down and making it something that's personal and yours that people can identify is where the art form comes in. And you know, otherwise, you know, I spent in my 20s just being a Judd Logan clone, and then in my 30s I was, you know, a little bit of Judd and a lot of Louis Simmons, and you know, and then you just kind of just keep bumping into these incredible people who teach you more and more, and becomes your system eventually.
I think so. And I think when you can start to let go of some of the emotional attachments to certain past systems, you start to have a lot more success too. You know, one thing that I've always said, for better or worse, and I think I have a tendency to catch some shit from some parties over it, but the one thing that I've always said is don't become emotionally attached to exercise selection. And it's not something that I've ever kind of coined as mine. To be 100% honest, when I look at my past, people are like, yeah, but you always squatted. No, I always threw the hammer, and I found that there was a correlation between squat and the hammer. I was good at the squat early, and John Welber, a power athlete, always jokes because the first time I ever squatted a max, it was 420. But I was 16 years old.
Yeah.
Right? I didn't know I was good at it. I just did it, and that's what happened. I went to some powerlifting meet when I was 16, and that was the result. A raw squat of 420, never having done the movement. And so people are like, so you're not in love with the squat? I'm like, no, I was in love with what the squat provided for me. But if someone had have intervened at 16, 17, or 18 and been like, okay, here's the deal. The squat will get you to this level of performance in sport, but these 3 exercises actually are better selection for you because you'll get to the same level, but you'll do it injury-free and have all these things. I would have taken those as my choices.
Right.
I love to work out, but I was always an athlete that worked out. I was never a guy that worked out and by default played a little sports.
Right.
You know, and so when I used to look at that, I think a lot of that mentality came from the fact that one of the very first references I ever had book-wise was Arnold Schwarzenegger's Encyclopedia of Modern Bodybuilding, right? Yeah, it was massive, it was huge, and in his book, between the pictures, because most people just looked at the pictures, he made a statement that not every exercise is for everybody. And he had an example of one of his training partners, the last name started with a Z, but it was Polish, I can't remember it, massive last name. And he made reference to the fact that exercises that he used didn't work for that guy, and vice versa. So they did different movements to get the same success in their careers to a degree. And for some reason that resonated with me when I was 16 years old. So I was like, okay, there's no one best exercise, so just train. And I think that kind of saved me because it allowed me to sort of deviate a lot from what everybody else in my town was doing. You know, I lived in a small town, so people were either doing just bodybuilding movement patterns or they were doing just powerlifting movement patterns. There was no in between. So there I am, you know, at 16 and a half at the local global gym trying to figure out how to do a power clean with a push press.
Sure,
right? Because there was a photo of Arnold doing it, and then there's photos of Reg Park doing it. I didn't know why they did it, but it looked extremely demanding and athletic, so I started doing it. And what that did is kind of put me into a mindset of adapt to the situation you're in, kind of be, as you say, a pirate of information or bounty that other people have already acquired. You know, because at the end of the day, you know, I'm only 43. So the industry's been around significantly longer than my career has. If I was to say I made any of this up, it'd be either delusional or coincidence, right? At best, probably delusional. But what I can do is be like, okay, my experiences as a world-class hammer thrower in one regard, or having worked in the NFL and NCAAs on the other regard, has put me in a situation where experience has taught me that some of that information is applicable and some of it is not. And that's where I think the concept of like a system comes from.
Yes,
So,
right.
you know, when I think of the Derek Woodske system, it's not that I made up any information. It's that I realized if I compiled information in a certain way in a certain circumstance, it was successful, or worse, it was a failure. And those happen too. So the system becomes a byproduct of not repeating failures, but not so much creating anything new.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's something that. Matter of fact, I was just on a podcast this morning, someone else's podcast, and we were talking about this, and he was basically asked me what system is the best.
Sure.
And I said, look, I'm 46. I said, I've been doing this since 1987. Everything seems to work.
Right.
It just depends on you and what you're willing to put into it. And if you're going to get up every morning and go, hey, I get to squat today, then great. That's probably what you should be doing,
Yep.
And so that was, that's kind of the conclusion I gave him, is that within reason, if you've got someone like yourself programming or a Poliquin or a Judd, it doesn't matter if your systems are vastly different from each other. You're going to make progress on those systems.
100%. And it's something I talked to Ryan Family about a lot in the past. And because we ran into conflict when we were working with Charles in particular, because when we were teaching for Charles, we were teaching a curriculum. The only way that curriculums work is if it's the same curriculum over and over and over, and it creates a system which has levels. For example, the best way I can correlate it is if you were taking traditional karate class, and you know that there was a belt system, white through black, but somewhere halfway through it, your instructor started, instructing BJJ, then that person isn't ever going to get to their karate black belt, and they need to stay within a curriculum to do so. It's cohesive. Okay, it doesn't mean it's the best system for fighting, right? It means that there may be some gaps in there, but it is a great system for education. Now, with that being said, there was never an intent to mislead anyone. It was just you can only cover so much information in a time frame with a structured system. It's the downfall of all educational systems. And what we used to argue is this is the nuts and bolts of a concept, but the information is so much greater than this, you should still leave with more questions than answers. You should start seeking information from this point. Because if you were to take all your favorite strength and conditioning authors or coaches or what have you, say you took 3 or 4 of them and you sat them around a table and you had them go through their entire philosophy of strength and conditioning, you may have 4 distinctly different ideologies between, say, a Louis Simmons and a Charles Poliquin and a Buddy Morris and a Charlie Francis, and then really, expand on that. But somewhere in there, you're going to find that there's going to be a handful of concepts that they can't disagree on. And that center of concept is the essence of what everybody should master. So when I always talk about getting a round table of brains together, their personalities may attract a subcategory or tribe to them because people are like-minded in that regard. And so people are going to follow Louis that like West Side concepts. They like the way they train. They're going to follow Elite if they like Dave, and especially the old Jim Wendler mentality. So if you are that personality, you're going to gravitate to those guys more than Charles Poliquin, for sure.
Yeah.
But from a theory coaching standpoint, in terms of mastery, you can follow whoever you want to follow, but understand that mastery is the thing they all agree on.
Yeah.
And if you can master that stuff, you'll tend to be very successful. But a lot of people never stop to listen to the agreeable conversation because it goes against the emotional connection they have to these different parties.
Yeah. That's a really good point because, like I said, I spent a lot of time, and I think when you're young, your best route is to find the best person you can and just try to mimic them as best as possible. And, not that I ever saw, Judd's system seems to be similar to yours where it's a conglomeration of a lot of...
Right.
Louis is Louis. Louis is just, this is the path, follow the path, or get the hell out of here.
Right.
And then one of the good things that happened to me was I actually had a talk with Jim Wendler at Swiss conference last year. And I just sat down and we just happened to bullshit for 2 hours, and we were talking about Netflix specials and books and everything else. But I had kind of gotten on this path where I was trying to simplify everything.
Right.
Because none of this seemed to make sense anymore. Why am I adding chains to the bar? Why am I adding bands to the bar? Do I need this box? Am I getting any better at this? And talking to him, it kind of reiterated what you just said, was that, there's these basic concepts that as long as you're following them, you're going to be okay. And then everything else around them is just a matter of preference, or a matter of what you think is going to work best for your athletes.
Right.
And that really solidified the route I was taking.
Yeah, and I think I had a similar realization when I decided that I couldn't spend as much time in the weight room anymore, in terms of, and it's not even because of my schedule. Psychologically, I think it was more, okay, I've been literally grinding away from X age to this point, and I kind of want to do some other stuff. Well, what do I have to sacrifice? Well, I have to sacrifice the hours that I'm spending in this place, which it's a big time commitment, especially if you're really putting into it. But how do I bridge the gap to some other areas? If I want to get comfortable with high altitude training, because my house is now at 8,000 feet, and I do a lot of sports that are high altitude based. Okay, so how do I do that? How do I balance it? And I realized that it was about simplifying. And the two things that have in the last couple of years have really come to light for me. One, the majority of older athletes don't need, and when I say older, it's a relative term, let's say 35 plus, athletes that actually have been training since they were teenagers consistently, so their training age is quite long. If you started training at 32, I hate to break it to you, you're not an old athlete. Yeah. You're an old fucker, but you're not an old athlete. You're a young athlete.
Training age is very young.
It's very young. You're still a newbie. You're a rookie to the world. So when you look at that, you have to look, okay, if they've got a lot of years are almost going to always equate to a lot of scar tissue, a lot of pattern overload, a lot of myofascial adhesion, maybe some surgeries in there. Maybe some things haven't gone perfectly over the course of your career physically. So when you look at that, what I found is that athlete, as they start to get older, they keep grinding the same patterns because they're trying to maintain a strength level that makes them feel a certain way. And I have nothing against that. However, what we typically discover is that strength and power, actual applicable power, something you can put into a barbell or put into an athletic arena, tends to get trapped inside of a dysfunctional system. And so what happens is the myofascial adhesions, the lack of flexibility, the surgeries, all these little tiny details that we tend to overlook so much in our career are inhibiting actual performance output. And even in younger athletes, if they would catch on to this in power sports a little earlier, they'd be more successful. Flexibility isn't a deterrent of power production if you do it in the proper correlations to the training. So yeah, don't do long static stretch before you do a back squat. I get that. But maintaining flexibility will allow you to back squat heavy longer and probably improve performance over time. And so the strange thing that I started to notice was I started doing other stuff. I started getting heavy into martial arts a few years ago and started stretching again because it was a byproduct of just adhering to the tribe. You got to go through, you got to train like everyone else. And then I started doing hard, long duration hikes where I was having to get into steeper patterns of movement. I was getting a lot of posterior chain from just hiking, just grinding away something that had no CNS really demanded. And then what I was finding, I was going into the weight room and my strength was going through the roof. And at first I was like, this is strange. I don't understand why I'm getting so strong. How is it that I went 4.5 months without touching a deadlift and I just trap bar deadlift over 600 pounds? This doesn't correlate to anything. And then I realized it's because I was unlocking a lot of basically issues with my system in terms of function because my myofascial systems were getting healthier from stretching, my planes of motion were improving, my ability to initiate force was improving because elasticity was coming back to a dysfunctional system that had been neglected. So it wasn't that I was getting stronger. I still may have been getting weaker, but my strength that was available could now be displayed because I didn't have a dysfunctional system.
That makes so much sense. I started grappling this year, and one of my frustrations was, I did Highland Games for 17 years of pro, 24 altogether, and one of my frustrations was that I kept doing these same things I've been doing for years. I wasn't getting any stronger.
Right.
I was now an old man, so I wasn't throwing very far. So I'm super frustrated as I was looking for outlets for that. But now I'm starting to stretch more. I'm doing more body weight exercises. I'm running. I'm doing all these athletic movements I've never done any before. My strength levels are still pretty high, but I'm not nearly training the way I used to. I'm not doing, I'm maybe hitting a heavy triple or a heavy 5 in the squat or deadlift, twice a month maybe, instead of every week under a West Side type system where I'm doing it. And that makes total sense now because this wasn't something I consciously did. It was just now I'm in jiu-jitsu. I have to be able to be a little bit more flexible.
Right.
And, that's really interesting that you brought that up. Maybe I'm on the right path.
I think so, and I think we have a tendency to all go through it, especially if we, again, like we're talking about previously, don't adhere or grip emotionally to something that is only one-dimensional of the industry.
I'm a power lifter, and I'll be a power lifter
for life. Exactly. Where extreme mobility may be a detriment at some level of your career. Losing body fat, detriment, right? And people don't want to talk about that. Everyone's like, yeah, but you can be huge and lean. It just takes longer. Listen, if that was the case, then the world record holder in women's Olympic weightlifting from China would not be an obese 400-pound cleaner.
Right.
And people are like, oh, that's offensive. I'm not being offensive. It's a medical fact.
Yeah.
She's obese.
Technical.
It's technical
it's
thing, right?
Opinion.
It's not my opinion. It's just reality. But what that allows her is a gold medal in the world record. Mm-hmm. So, choose your battles. Now, I say that coming from a perspective of I've ran the gauntlet. I was a lean hammer thrower. When I finished throwing hammer, I wanted to see how strong I could get, so I got up to 320 pounds. That was not swimsuit material, right? I was fat. I was fucking strong, right? It was cool.
Yeah.
It wasn't healthy, right? But I wanted to, for whatever reason, psychologically, I think there was a part of me that wanted to go down that road to see what was down it and to see whether or not I would benefit or have any negatives to that road. So I went all the way down that road and had to come all the way back out and realized that being able to, say, box squat 600 for reps on any given day was kind of cool in the box squat for 600 rep community, right? So it's like you had your people you could interact with, and that was neat. But on the backside of it, I gave up all this other stuff that I had to regain.
You're certainly not hiking anytime.
Not hiking anytime. I was tying my shoes on the side, right?
I've been there.
Yeah,
totally been there.
The things that people don't think about. I was blowing out a pair of Reeboks a month. But with that being said, I got a lot of information from that path. The biggest thing that I learned from it is that human performance and cosmetic performance have nothing to do with each other. We have a bit of a weird world. I personally think, and I have been fortunate to see the pre and post internet era of performance enhancement. I've seen the pre and post internet era of peptides. Peptides have been around forever, but now they're actually accessible. And there's a lot of positives and negatives to both. But having been on both sides of that coin, I come from a generation where, if you missed a drug test, it was potentially a 2-year suspension, to all of a sudden people arguing for drug testing to be kind of abolished because of the celebrity status of the UFC. It's completely changed the dynamic of the conversation. I remember, as you do as well, my Johnny would have been in the NFL if he had taken drugs, right?
I still hear that.
You still hear that
all the time.
To now, it's like, oh, maybe Johnny would be in the NFL. He took drugs, right? Like all of a sudden, that same person is having a very different opinion on it. So the industries that we've kind of negotiated through have changed a lot as well. Every big guy was a drug user. Every lean guy must have been on something. Whereas now we're starting to realize that it's a little more complex than that. But on the other side of it, we're also seeing a blatant use of performance enhancers in sort of the general, not professional, not amateur ranks of strength and conditioning, but what I think of as the social media ranks of so so it's
Couple
like
names come to mind.
yeah,
I
you
won't
can think
say,
of it,
but
right?
Yeah.
So like in our earlier generations, you knew that if you wanted to pursue the sport of bodybuilding at a high level, eventually you'd take anabolics and you would compete in bodybuilding. And it was like, ooh, that's super risque. Now all of a sudden it's like, well, it's easy to get. It doesn't seem to be that harmful, so they think, what's a little bit of masculinization or a little bit of baldness for some social media likes? So the industry's become a very gray area now where it's hard to understand how program periodization and program development sort of correlates in terms of who you're dealing with as well.
Yeah.
It changes it a bit, right? People are
Works
getting
the water up.
it murks it up because people are getting really strong really fast. People are able to maintain super low body fats year round, even if they're not diet coherent. So you may be adding fuel to a fire that's not burning efficiently. There's a lot of stuff like that in terms of program design, which is weird that I circled back to this somehow, that I think people need to keep in mind as well, because when I started developing my programs in the beginning, it was very black and white. If somebody was on an anabolic, you knew, and it was like a very hush-hush conversation.
Right.
And then you planned accordingly because you knew you could get away with this for this many weeks, and they were getting ready, say, for the Arnold Classic, so you knew that you could upregulate during the prep because they were going to be using more drugs while they were dieting to get ready for the show. And you'd plan for that. And then the majority of people that came across, the majority of college athletes, 99.9%, and same in the NFL, don't use drugs. Right. They may have used drugs at some point, and they may use drugs at some point in the future, but 99% of the people that you saw, they didn't.
Yeah.
And a lot of people like to hang on to the idea that everybody in the NFL was on drugs, but it just wasn't the case. And those people, their programming had to be so much more sophisticated, right? So that's the other thing that I'm seeing a lot right now in the industry is there's a lot of money being made on very unsophisticated programming.
Yeah, so the the performance enhancing is such it's funny that it's such a taboo word for, especially for guys. For the girls, if you're a woman who's got a loss of sex drive and you're not sleeping well, you go and get your estrogen taken care of. If a guy does it, in most cases it's a big deal. I'm a big fan of TRT.
Right.
Love it, but it's not me becoming Dorian Yates. It's me
Right.
getting everything regulated and feeling good and not being sick every month and being able to sleep and chase my wife and all this stuff.
Yep.
But by what you're saying, you can take these very unskilled people who, in a very short time, have taken decent genetics and a lot of performance-enhancing drugs, and now they're selling programming.
Yes.
So now you can buy their program for $300 a month, and that's probably cheap.
Right.
And you think you're going to get the same results as these guys do, and it's so unsophisticated and not geared towards anything that you know about this person at all. I don't know anything about Jonathan, but here's my program that you're going to try because it worked for me.
Right.
It's going to work for you now.
Yeah. Or it worked for this person, so I'm just going to literally photocopy it and give it to you.
Yeah.
So now I'm making, $300 per person off one program that I've mass produced 30 or 40, maybe 100 times.
Yeah.
And you saw that a lot with the rise of the WBFF.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Everyone does, like Paul DeLay's claim to the fame. The only federation in the world that you paid to compete in, but you didn't win money. Right? Genius.
That's great.
Yeah, and everybody became pro fitness competitors, and they used it to market themselves. And people forget about the WBFF because it was so geared towards what we think of as male figure and female figure in fitness. It was like that perfect two categories that everyone was psychologically okay with, right? Very fit women and kind of muscular guys, but not too muscular. And they wore board shorts. Right?
Yeah.
So when you look at that, a lot of those people, and the company had perfect timing that couldn't have been predicted. They released it as Instagram and social media were exploding. And so everybody that qualified and eventually competed in the WBFF received a pro card. And then all those people, because they looked a certain way, could now sell themselves as a professional because of the certification or because of the classification, and they dominated.
Yeah.
And they were dominating kind of right when CrossFit kicked in. Like CrossFit had definitely been around as long as the WBFF had been, but CrossFit in terms of the online programming didn't really exist outside of the structure of WODs, right? You had the CrossFit website, they posted their WODs, and everyone adhered to that. But then all of a sudden, you know, like Fitzgerald at OPEX and some of these other guys who had won CrossFit Games in the past kind of stepped aside and were like, hold on a second. Why do I have to be CrossFit exactly? Like, isn't it just strength and...
You're speaking to the choir.
Right? Isn't it just strength and conditioning at the end of the day and variations? And that's when you saw the CrossFit world explode open into, okay, we're going to prepare you for a games or prepare you as a CrossFit athlete, but we're not going to adhere. Tuesday isn't Margaret. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Tuesday's got to be something different. So that is where you started to see a lot of these WBFFers, they were selling to the fitness world, and then people that kind of look like them but all of a sudden could do tasks, right? Because that's really the difference. Right. Well-built humans that can now do tasks and not just stand on stage. There's a whole nother clientele that was like, okay, I want to look good, but I want to move well. I want to be able to do stuff. And that blew open. And all of a sudden that online market became huge, but it didn't guarantee that the best coaches were getting their information out there, because typically what we've seen until people learned, the best coaches weren't really that good at marketing. They didn't like to talk about themselves, for good reason, because their psychology put them as teachers, not as sellers. And B, they may not have the physical appearance of somebody that's going to sell on a website, right? And Buddy Morris said it best. He goes, in the private sector, unlike the NFL, and for people that don't know Buddy, he's always been built extremely well, super lean, super athletic guy. But he said it clearly. He said, in the private sector, your body's your business card. He goes, at the end of the day, if you can't get the message across, you will still fail in the end, but at least you will get the introduction based on how you look. He goes, in the NFL, it doesn't really matter. He goes, in NCAA coaching, it doesn't really matter. A shot put coach could be 300 pounds. Who gives a shit? But if you want to sell a program online, you're going to have to look a certain way.
It's one of the things I wanted to stress to some of the young coaches tomorrow, that you're going to sell your body to these uneducated people out there who don't know any better.
They don't know any better. And you're a perfect example. So if we go back 15 years, how heavy were you?
310.
310.
I had no clients because no one wanted to look like me.
Right. It didn't matter how smart you are. Yeah. And, you know, it's funny. No one likes to remember that shit. Like, even take Dave Tate. In 2007, people forget that Dave got down to 4%.
Super lean.
Like, so lean that, well, he was 255. And I remember I had a really interesting coincidence. I've always been a Forrest Gump of our industry. So I was sitting in the Cleveland Browns facility with Milo, Thomas Linsky. Dave and Jim came up. Elite FTS was kind of just a website back then. I wouldn't even say they were much more of that. But that was literally 3 days before that photo shoot. And Dave was eating chicken, like chicken of bodybuilding chicken. Like, nothing about it was normal. And consuming huge amounts of sodium. Like a amount that would shock even the most, like, Rhino would be blown away by the amount of sodium that Dave it was a huge amount. And I remember asking him, I was like, okay, you're carrying around a big salt container, like 250 grams. I'm like, what's the deal with that? And I had so many questions back then. And he goes, here's what I realized. When I was completely deprived of carbohydrates and I couldn't train, he goes, if I took in a bunch of sodium, my strength went through the roof. And I was like, really? And he's like, yeah. He goes, so on my high sodium days, I was able to bounce right back up to 12s and 15s with 80-pound dumbbells. And he said, I'm completely depleted out. He goes, I'm dropping water as well right now for this photo shoot. And I remember that was the first time I'd ever heard the connection between sodium relationship and strength. Yeah. And he was starting to look in, and I don't know where he went with it since, but it's so long ago, but he was already starting to look into the idea that maybe it wasn't so much the carbohydrate that was making us strong as it was the water retention that followed, right? The hydraulics of it. And the sodium was the key. And then you have Stan, who's talking about sodium consumptions now being the need being way higher, but he's only talking 5-6 grams a day for power athletes, and it's like, there's probably something to that.
Yeah, there's something
much
in the middle
bigger.
there, yeah.
And so, like you say, talking with these young athletes, it's like, even myself, at 43 and all the surgeries I've had, there's two things I've had a harsh reality with this year. I can't eat like an asshole anymore.
Yep.
I just can't.
You pay for it.
You pay for it, and
Not
it's
just the way you look, the way you feel the next
way you
day.
feel.
Oh.
And for me, it's been the last 6 months in particular, because I was still getting away with it, because as I was starting to lose weight, I was starting to put in all this metabolic work, tons of assault bike, tons of hiking, and I could still get away with eating bad. And I was just literally training to eat at different times, stress-related stuff. That's all right. I'll just do more metabolic work. Right, and
You're gonna burn it off.
Burn it off, right? And you can get away with that for about a 30% improvement.
Yeah.
After that, it doesn't matter. But then what I realized, and this has hit me hard the last 6 months, I'm about a 1 hour window from certain foods, and I hate to use the word gluten, but it is what it is. If I eat foods that have a really high gluten protein content, I don't get celiac. It's nothing crazy like that. It's none of this homeopathic stuff. My joints hurt, and I can't breathe through my nose, and it is clockwork.
Yeah.
And it just is what it is. And it's funny because I never used to like kind of accept it, because I'd have to accept that half my diet would have to go in the toilet. And then I had the 23andMe genetic testing done. Sure as shit, I carry one of two the genes for celiac disease.
Right.
And my old man does as well, and he's the same way. It's like his whole life he becomes a congested human being from sandwiches. But you just are like, yeah, whatever. Right? Just whatever. You just let it go.
Yeah.
And so I'm starting to come to terms with that. And it's a bit of a psychological kick in the balls, man, because I like food.
Right. Oh, sure. Right.
Right? I like the social setting in which you enjoy it. I like eating food that makes me, as a former power athlete, makes me feel relaxed. Because, to be honest, I spend 85% of my waking day in a slightly elevated state of readiness for no reason.
Right.
It's just how I was wired. It's the
Yeah.
reason why I could squat for 20 as a tiny little kid. I was given a nervous system that was, ready to go. As I now call it, I was given a dysfunctional nervous system. And people are like, well, fuck, how can you have a dysfunctional nervous system and have been a world-ranked hammer thrower? And I'm like, that's why I was a world-ranked hammer thrower.
Yeah.
People aren't supposed to live a life of slightly elevated cortisol readiness all day long. And I never used to identify it as like a dysfunctional nervous system, but it is, and my electrical system runs a bit hot. And then I started meeting other athletes that were dealing with the same shit.
Yeah.
And I worked with this athlete in the NFL who's an offensive lineman who was so powerful that he broke his own ribs locking up with the D end. And that was a guy and I was working with him long after my time with the Browns. I was doing like a consult with him in California. And I remember sitting across from him, and he's just explaining all this stuff and how if he doesn't eat carbohydrates, he has all these issues psychologically that follow, and he gets emotional and all this stuff. And I just flat out said to him, I'm like, all right, tell me this. When you get up in the morning and you put your feet on the ground, is the first thought that goes through your head, oh, I'm awake, let's get going, or is it dread and despair? Right? And this is a $35 million superstar, right? The guy had everything going for him. And he caught like kind of white and panicky, and he goes, when my feet hit the ground, the first thing I think is don't die today. And I'm like,
wow.
Right? Like, fucking don't die is his first thought.
Yeah.
Not even playing football. And I'm like, exactly. I go, your cortisol production and your adrenal production is dysfunctional. And it's not fatigue or any of these holistic methods. This guy is just designed to kill shit. Right? And in today's modern society, that type of neurological system doesn't fit well all the time, right? Car sirens, traffic, people, danger, real danger. That guy just kind of fries himself out. And I was very much the same way. So the easiest way, and it's almost like the subconscious way to sedate that overwhelming anxiety, is carbohydrates. It drives up serotonin, and you get like this weird euphoric break from like the fight or flight, right? And it's a really strange thing. And Matt Vincent, a Hate Brand guy, I say it like no one knows who Matt Vinson is, right? The hate brand guy. So Matt and I were talking about this, and he kind of ran into the same problem. Like when he was the Fat Owl back in the Highland Games days.
I used to call him Bluto when we
Bluto, right? Exactly. So when you look at him, yeah, he did look like Bluto.
Did
That's
he?
amazing. So when you look at him, but that's what he said too. Like when he started changing his diet, so much of it was like the forced elimination of food, but then trying to offset that with a huge destabilization of mood patterns. And it's funny because I wouldn't be a betting man on this, but there sure is a huge coincidence between former power athletes that started eating really clean and their reliance on things like CBD.
Yeah. So first of all, I get the whole thing. So I think the manifestation of all that nervous system is us becoming throwers.
Yeah.
Or it's guys going through buds and becoming seals, or we're just wired to do this from time immemorial.
Yeah.
And we're just looking for outlets for this, because I feel that same way. I mean, I'm just constantly ready to go.
And it doesn't go away.
And there doesn't need to be any reason. No one's attacking me. But as I started to change my diet up and started to feel better, and then I was able to do more, and I've gone down that CBD road too. I mean, I'm a huge fan. I'm sponsored by Warrior CBD, and it's just like, it just gives you that couple minutes before bed where it's just like, okay, and everything just slows down just a little bit, man.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge fan of it, and I never thought, I was like, all right, whatever. Everybody's talking about it now, but I agree 100%.
It's strange, isn't it? And I sort of I stumbled into CBD. So, like for me, and just as an FYI, I have zero affiliation with anyone in the supplement industry. So if I'm talking about something, it's because I've experimented with it. But a number of years back, I had a catastrophic surgery go wrong on an Achilles tendon. I almost lost my foot. I had infections that came with it, and just some really funky stuff.
Tough surgery, just
in general.
Yeah.
And so I ended up having surgery twice on the same Achilles in 3 weeks. And so it was a really horrific deal. And then I had an open wound for just over a year. It was bad. Everything about it that could have gone.
Open wound for a year.
Yeah, man. It was gross. And what it was is they realized now in retrospect I was probably rejecting some suture because they did a bovine graft. And there was a Medline suture that they think my body wasn't tolerating. And so it kept trying to push it through the skin. But because of it, it left the wound open. And they started to think that when you get exposure to a tendon with air, it almost always kills it, which I wasn't aware of with all my surgeries. And they estimated that I had an exposed Achilles tendon for 3-4 months from this wound. But what they didn't realize is I always kept the wound packed with honey. Right? I did a bunch of strange stuff with that surgery.
Where the hell did you figure that out?
I'll tell you in a second, actually. And so I'll jump to that after this. So with the CBD, where that came in is when you have that much nerve damage, which I had a lot of, and chronic pain and all that other stuff, obviously they want to prescribe a lot of opioid medication, right? And not in a negative way. They're just trying to manage the fact that typically pain inhibits healing. And so I did the typical cycles of the opioids, and it worked, but I was finding that it wasn't really doing much for me. Thank God, in retrospect, I don't have an addictive personality to the opioid, and I know that can be a genetic factor, but I was becoming addicted to the sense of relief I was getting. But it wasn't so much a pain relief as it was a depression of the CNS. So the opioid, when I took it, didn't really make me feel any better, but it gave me a calm sensation. Yes. Right? And so what I found is I was taking the hydrocodones to relax, even though I wasn't taking very many of them, but I would take them to relax at night, assuming it was for my injury, but in reality it was for my brain. And so once I kind of woke up to that, I'm like, I don't think I'm taking these for the right reason. It was kind of a logical process. I actually started to investigate not only into marijuana, but CBDs. I lived in Colorado at the time, so what the hell, right? Free game, right? And I'd never been a marijuana smoker in my life, so I didn't have any, I didn't know how it was going to make me feel. I didn't know anything. So I did a ton of research, and initially I just settled on CBD oils. And the CBD oil after I started getting the dose right, was giving me the same psychological reset that I was getting from the opioids.
Did you find it helped your? So, I was just talking about this on a podcast today, where one of the things I really need to work on in 2020 is my emotional status, where I get angry for no reason at all.
Right.
And I don't know why I'm angry or who I'm angry at. I'm just angry.
Right.
And I wonder if that has a lot to do with that same
CNS
And I wonder,
dysfunction.
were you the same way? Did you have
Oh yeah,
problems like
so
that?
Megan, my girlfriend, she refers to it as grenading, right? So she goes, "You're a grenade. You don't have a fuse. You have a pin." And so, and it happens like I'll be like, and this is a perfect example of me driving in my car. Hey, yeah, so this was really cool. Let me tell you this story. Hey, motherfuckers,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah, that's
and she's
me.
like, how is that possible?
Yeah.
She goes, you literally have the right side of your brain is having a conversation with me, and the left side of your brain is acknowledging someone
Yes.
doing something stupid. And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I go, because I don't have any emotional anger attached to that
Right.
moment. Like once I'm the junkyard dog that barks through the fence as the skateboarder goes by, it's like I'm like back to licking my
Yep.
balls, because I'm just like,
You flash and then it's
yeah,
gone.
and I'm like,
Yep.
what I do, right? Like, so I think it made us great in power sports. It's flipping the switch, right? Like boom, boom,
And now we're let loose on society.
yeah,
There's nothing to do with
nothing
it.
to do, right? So you're yelling at people through the window of your car,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, I was very much the same way. And what I found is I do think with the cannabinoid system that it has a benefit on that system. And I feel like it's like a cooling effect to whatever that gear is.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that gear is bad. A lot of people are like, it sounds like anger management issues. And it's like, well, it sounds like you're fucking weak issue. Like you have a
Right?
tendency.
Yeah.
Because it's like those psychological traits I've seen in people my whole life. And those people have never been harmful, but they've been extremely proficient at engaging in situations that needed to be dealt with. So a lot of the first responders in my mom's family, and my whole mom's side of the family is all, at one time was all EMT or firemen. And they were extremely reactionary, but they were extremely reactionary when they needed to be in terms of saving lives as well. It's like that brain just turns on and off. And my dad is also the same way. And so I found that what I couldn't do naturally was let that kind of wind itself down at night. Like I would have a tendency to take forever to shut down the system. And it wasn't because I was wound up. It was just like my brain just stayed hot all day. And so reacting to training or reacting to sport or reacting to physical activity, when it came time for quiet, people would be like, well, set up a routine and do lights and do all these different things and cool yourself. And what I found is it would work, but all that energy went from being physically reactive energy to extremely psychologically creative energy. Mm-hmm. So it's like, hey, yeah, your idea worked awesome, but like I just wrote 500 or 600 words at 2 a.m. that I was not anticipating writing, because that CNS, it's almost internalized and became a different outlet. Whereas when I started to introduce CBD, I started to actually just shut off, and I get what I would think of as like blank mental space, but not empty mental space, just blank. And it allowed me to wind down and finally go to sleep. The other thing that it did is it actually started for me, especially with my knee surgeries and what have you, is I realized I could start to handle a lot more volume and training. And that was the only thing I had to be a little careful of. And I was talking to somebody about this recently. So when I was taking high amounts of CBD, I was still working in Saudi Arabia. And so I wasn't 100% sure if I should take it with me, which to this day I still haven't taken it with me over there. I'm sure it'd be fine, but it's just, you got to be careful, right?
Yeah.
Especially international stuff. And so I'd done this massive block where I'd been squatting a lot and started squatting heavy again. And it was a 2-month period where I didn't have to go over to the Middle East. And so I was, squatting multiple days in that 2-month period, where for me at my stage of my life now, where if I got to 500, that was a big, heavy day. So I got to it a bunch of times in that period. And I felt like a rock star. About 4 or 5 days after I got to the Middle East, I didn't have any sense of withdrawal from the CBD, but holy shit, did I start to feel bad. Like all of a sudden my knees and my back and my hands, all my arthritic areas from throwing hammer, there was one day I could barely walk. And I was like, whoa, what did I do on the plane? And then I sort of thought about it and I'm like, no, it's like that stuff is so powerful at controlling inflammation that I was just pounding away at myself and I was unaware. So that's the only thing I say in retrospect with it, where it's like, it's effective, and it's not too effective, it's that effective that you can get away with tolerating, for me anyway, some really high volumes and maybe not really feeling the detriment.
What do you do? Are you in like the sublingual drops, or?
I've done both. Colorado was kind of convenient because I would use gummies, CBD gummies, sublingual drops. I smoked it. I smoked the vape pen a lot in the beginning because it seemed like the most convenient way to do it. And then most recently, I've gone to using like pills and capsules.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a hard time. I've tried gummies and I get zero effect from them. But the sublingual drops, I get the effect. But I'll eat 1,500 milligrams of gummy bears and nothing happens to me.
Right.
So I don't know.
And it could be something as simple as the receptor sites in the lining of the stomach in relationship to the digestion, whereas you're actually getting blood transfer through the sublinguals through the mouth because it's the same tissue. It's just not, having to get disrupted by any stomach acidity.
Right, yeah.
So there could be something there. I've had muscular success because I have a messed up neck with the CBD cream, but for whatever reason, and I don't know if it's psychosomatic or coincidence, if I use CBD cream on my neck, I will forever have some sort of rapid dream.
Really?
Yeah, and at first I thought it was coincidence because, I had some PTSD stuff from rockets attack in Saudi Arabia, and I was like, I'm back home, it's just my brain is still hyperactive. So then I took a break from it, used it again. Sure enough, woke up in the middle of my front room swinging a pillow.
Wow.
So I was just like, okay, there's something going on with the cream on my neck and my dream state.
Yeah.
Because I've never been a sleepwalker. Then again, how would I know? But I've never been a sleepwalker. Yeah. So that's the only place I won't put the cream now is on my neck.
Yeah.
Especially before bed. It does help with arthritic issues I have in my neck, but I will have the absolutely wild dreams.
Yeah, I'm thinking about increasing my dosage because and I'm bad about it because I'll skip or I'll forget or I'll let it run out, and right now I'm out of it and it just everything hurts and I just don't feel as good. I get these crazy knuckles that are all torqued up, and jiu-jitsu doesn't help that, and so I really need to focus more on it and make sure it's part of my wellness plan.
Yeah, and to be honest, and I think it's a little bit, for me, a little bit of that punk rock attitude from when I was younger. Whenever I was an early adapter to CBD, and then when everybody started selling it, I was the first guy to be like, fuck CBD, right? I don't even know why I did it. I was such a contrarian. So I was just like, yeah, shit, everybody's selling it. Well, this is bullshit, right? Where's my record collection? So I took a break from it. I was making a statement in my own head. And I was like, after about a month and a half, I was like, that stuff works pretty well.
Yeah.
I'm like, maybe they're onto it. Maybe just people realize it's a good product. So I made the switch back, but I became a little bit more of a skeptic consumer, right? The big one that people didn't catch right away is everyone sells CBDs now, like grocery stores and what have you. The laws for the supplemental side are so much different that the dose can be really low. And so everyone's like, I bought this great CBD product it could be a reputable supplement company too, don't get me wrong. They're like, it was so much cheaper than going to the CBD shop or going to a place that it follows under federal regulations. And it's like, yeah, because it's not the same.
I keep telling people that because I have to do an ad for Warrior at the beginning of each program. And if you buy it from here in Ohio, you can buy it in gas stations and grocery stores, and it's basically essential oils that you're.
Yes.
There's nothing to it. You're not going to get the benefits. And people at my gym will come to me. Oh, I heard your ad for the CBD company, but I bought some from Giant Eagle, and I'm just like, well, good luck with that.
Good luck.
'Cause it's not going to work.
Yeah, and it sort of sucks that that's the case because I learned that late. So it's funny that you went through the same experience. Say now I live in California. What we have in California in particular is you can get a CBD product from the distributor stores, from the like federal marijuana distributors, and it'll be 0 THC.
Mm-hmm.
But because the company that's producing it is producing it under the laws of marijuana production, the CBD potency has to be exact. Whereas, say, Gardens of Nutrition, that doesn't exist, but let's say Gardens of Nutrition supplement at Whole Foods, their ratios can be very, very low and still pass guidelines of CBD because they may have variations of cannabinoids in it or CBN or CBDs, but the manufacturing process and the testing processes are different. So as much as it costs more, and I hate to recommend it, it's like you have to kind of stay with the people that were coming through the marijuana production side that started producing CBDs, because they're, as odd as it sounds, their laws are stricter. They have to adhere to federal regulations or state regulations that the supplement industry just doesn't. It's always been that way.
Yeah, for everything. Not just,
supplements are suspect.
Yeah.
It's like getting good companies like Thor Nutrition are not common.
Yeah.
They're not, right? Like if I have to buy supplements, I'm kind of always going to gravitate towards medical-based supplementation. Thorn or Designs for Health or whatever you use. But there's a reason. The shit works. Doesn't work. The label claim actually meets the label claim.
Yeah, and you saw how easy it was in was it Bigger, Stronger, Faster to create your own supplement line. It's
super easy.
Very easy to do.
I mean, it's so easy that there's a supplement company, I think right now, I can't remember the name. I actually can remember the name, but its owner is on like federal indictment in the state of Florida.
Yeah,
like that's some serious shit, right? And it's for a company he used to own that got hammered by the government and turned around and started a whole new company that is a $20 million a month company.
Welcome to Florida.
Yeah, exactly, right? So it's, the supplement industries, you got to be careful. That's one in particular, even though I used to work in it, maybe that's why I know it so well, is it's, the label is not the label, And
no one says it has to be for those things,
Proprietary blend.
Right? Yeah, I heard Kyle Turley talk about cannabinoids on Power App. That podcast, I don't know if you heard that podcast, was like, it's like, okay, all right, I get it. I understand,
Right. Yeah.
But he is such a passionate guy about it. I learned a lot from the podcast.
But it's intense, right?
Yeah.
And I think that happened to me a little bit too with the early Joe Rogan stuff. They were talking about it so much. And I think it's like anything. If people talk about something enough, you start to wonder how much they're getting paid, right? It's just one of those things. Anytime there's a consumer product involved, it's like all of a sudden someone starts talking about a certain brand of clothing or certain anything. You're like, oh, okay, you're getting paid. It's not the best you're getting paid, right? Now, I think, unfortunately, that's a byproduct of the social media era, but it is what it is. So, for example, like Bert Sorn and I have an old relationship. We go back to college sports. And with, say, Sornex in particular, or that company, it's kind of funny because, like, I'll talk about Sornex a lot because I respect the company and I respect Bert and his father, right? And Bert and I were talking about this actually at Zach Brown's house. We were all together. Name drop. Name drop. So we were all hanging out, and I was actually explaining to Zach because he didn't know this. I go, here's the funny thing about it is I don't own any Sornex equipment in terms of racks or what have you because I don't have the space for it right now where I live. I said, and I've never received anything for free.
Yeah.
And Zach's like, what? And he like kind of bust Bert's balls about it a little bit because, Bert's standing right there. And I go, it's actually my decision. I go, because when I started speaking at Sornex at the Summer Strong event, I didn't want there to be any correlation to what I was saying and some perceived concept.
Makes sense.
And I think that came from the Poliquin days where I spoke so much for a company that had an agenda that I felt like it started to dilute the potential of the message. So now it's like, am I against doing promotional or ambassador stuff for financial restitution? Absolutely not. But man, it has to be something where If I'm using it, it's because it's a part of my everyday usage,
Yeah.
or it's something that I think can actually benefit a group of people, right?
Yeah.
But it's murky waters, and so when you do get into these conversations and you like go down a rabbit hole like we just did about CBDs in our own experience, you always want to kind of step back and be like, by the way, I'm not selling you anything, and that's kind of become tough because I wish we didn't have to do that all the time.
Yeah, I put that stipulation out there that
Yeah.
that this is something. It used to be that you could trust people to not be selling.
Right.
The guys like us would not be selling. Maybe, I don't know, name some famous person out there might be selling something.
Absolutely.
But us guys that are whatever we are.
Yeah, the average Joes of the industry were never the hidden shells, right? Like they weren't the people that were secretly getting the message out because
there was nowhere to get the message out.
There was nowhere to get the message out to, and I think a lot of us that came from the pure strength and conditioning side of it, for better or worse, we always saw the act of human performance. I don't want to say it's sacred. A lot of people try to use those terms, the old timers. It was sacred back then. And it's like it's never been fucking sacred. Since the days of Joe Weider in magazines selling Muscle Builder, nothing about this industry is sacred. What is sacred is the fact that you could go into a gym and work on a collective thing with a group of like-minded people. Mm-hmm. That part of it, that's sacred. Yeah. That's a sisterhood or a brotherhood of iron or whatever you want to call it, where you could go to a place, didn't matter your ethnicity, your creed, your religion, everyone was kind of welcome, like as long as they believed in training hard, and I think coming from sports that way, that was how I looked at it. So it was like, I don't, this is a very honest statement, the vast majority of my teammates in college, the female teammates, were all lesbian. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them couldn't publicly, and even in the late 90s, talk about that.
Yeah, right.
It was kind of taboo, right? But we all knew because they were a part of our inner circle. That they were our sacred people.
Yeah.
So they could come and be with us, and no one would ever question it or judge it. And if they were dating one another and they had moments of intimacy around us, because that's what you're supposed to do, no one even acknowledged it as an abnormality. But you get out of that sacred circle and they go back out into the university world, or they go out to a bar, especially in Wyoming. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden there's a giant spotlight on them, right? So for me, that part of it was always extremely protective and extremely sacred. And that's the part I miss the most, I think, where some of the social media wall has broken that down a little bit, where people don't realize how important those relationships founded under physical duress actually were.
Yeah.
And I miss that a little bit. But as much as I've been a critic in the past of different things, it's also the reason why I'm glad a sport like CrossFit showed up, because it reestablished a sacred place for physical bonding.
Right. Yeah. And getting back to CrossFit, it changed the fitness landscape to me for the better. I think nothing has done more to get more people off the couch than CrossFit. Nothing has done more to get people to people like us, because I don't know about you, but for years I was thinking, God, I'm personal training these people. They should be doing cleans, and they should be doing squats and box jumps and deadlifts and throwing medicine balls, but nobody's training like that. All they want to do is curls and work on the machines.
It wasn't even gyms with the space.
No.
Right. And
now that's the way everybody wants to train. So when we talked earlier about CrossFit gyms or functional fitness gyms, kind of going, depending on who was in charge, kind of going, we really don't need that giant conglomerate and company, because I'm skilled enough, because I've worked with Judd Logan or Poliquin or whoever, that I can get you to the CrossFit Games.
Right.
And it's going to have nothing to do with CrossFit.com, because you're not going to do that girl workout. We're going to train.
Right.
And we'll get you there, because you're an athlete. There's, if you would have taken, maybe like an Adrian Blewett when she was 19 years old.
Right.
I think any of us could have got her to the CrossFit Games.
Absolutely.
Because she was that good of an athlete.
Yep. One of my former teammates who went through the gauntlet, Robin Lyons, Robin had been an elite level hammer and discus thrower in college, through hammer and disc probably around 190 pounds. Then after college, she was an early adapter to CrossFit. I think she owned one of the first boxes. I can't remember the name of the first one. The second one she owned was Black Sheep in Utah, and that goes way back to like 2009, right? So she got into that world very quickly, competed at the games, did the whole 9 yards, and then eventually progressed out of that to being an OPEX coach, and now she owns Mountain Lab out in Driggs, which is a private training center. But it's the same story. It's like she was able to finally find a place where her aptitude for coaching could actually be maximized.
Yeah, right.
It's like when you look at Robin, she will never be a female bodybuilder. It's not her style. So like when she got out of hammer throwing and decided to lose all the weight, she lost weight towards what you would think of as a triathlete looking body. She was still strong, but she's just tall and lean. That's what made her a good thrower. It's what made her clean 265 pounds or whatever the ridiculousness was in college. But there was no way that she could compete from a purely sales point side with a fitness chick from Venice Beach.
Yeah.
It's not happening. Yeah. So she had a misfit place. She could do the clean, she could do the box jump, she could sprint, she could do all that stuff. She was an athlete. But it's Robin. Robin's a coach first, not a figure competitor. And so for her, when I think she was really clever when she realized that and was like, oh, okay, CrossFit's cool. Oh, Jim Jones. That's kind of like the original CrossFit, but no one knew about them, right? Yeah. So you start to look at all these things, and she just took all that information. It's like, okay, these are my people. And she's never gone without in a private sector coaching standpoint because of that. Yeah. She found a home. And I think CrossFit, as much as I was resistant against it in the beginning because I was like, we used to do this.
Yeah.
This
is the way we've always trained.
Always trained. And I think for some of us, myself included, even though there shouldn't have been, it was like an unnecessary jealousy towards the idea of somebody like maybe like cashing in on the secret. Right? Just
let's face it, that they cashed in on
it.
It's America, that's
that's how it works. And that's how we saw it. It's like this is ours. And it's like, well, is it though?
Yeah.
Because I'm pretty sure there's a Polish weightlifting video from the 50s that we took most of the stuff from, right? So I think for some of us, there was a bit of a stagnation where we're like, oh, yeah, they're taken from our pocket. No, because we weren't fucking making any money doing it yet anyway. Yeah. So once I got past that, I had the same realization where I kind of sat back and I'm like, oh, man. They reintroduced platforms to global gyms.
Right.
Like, that is crazy to think. To think that I, at 24 Hour Fitness in Broomfield, Colorado, right before I moved out of Broomfield, had 3 platforms and a rig rack system.
Yeah.
In a 24 Hour Fitness. And I was like, that's CrossFit. Yeah. That is 100% CrossFit's.
My son's high school weight room has a Rogue rig and Pendlay bumper plates and...
Right.
They're horrible team. But
they got a great weight room. That's it though. And you can't argue with that. Like I remember in college coming home for Christmas up to Canada, or if we were on holidays, or if we were on the road as a team, it was almost impossible to work out. You were going to be doing cleans with metal plates, you're going to be training the best of your ability around a global gym setting. And now, every single gym, when I was traveling with Zach this past year, with Zach, it was a unique situation because they do have a trailer that travels on the road with the band, and they'll use it, but it's still kind of limited, and it could be reconfigured. There's a market out there for anyone that's listening to design proper weight rooms for the road that don't look like hotel gyms. But we would get somewhere and we're like, okay, we're going to be in Nashville. And it was easy. Drop-in fee to a CrossFit gym. That's it. They may not train there, but if I want to go away and train somewhere, done. Right? It's changed everything.
Yeah.
I would have been able to train like an athlete on the road my entire career. That's a big change, big improvement.
I remember going to Steve Pulsinella's gym, Iron Sport, out in Philadelphia, to lift Atlas stones one time because they were the only gym that I knew of that would have Atlas stones. And you go there, now it's like You walk in a CrossFit gym, there's a bunch of Atlas stones sitting there.
It makes no sense even,
No.
right? Like, you're just like, why are these here? And then you're like, because the market is just that much bigger.
Yeah.
And that actually kind of circles back to what I think. Like, you know, I said the NFL wasn't as drug laden as people want it to be. And I think people want it to be full of drugs, to be honest, because it makes them sleep better at night. They don't realize that these guys are just the 1%.
Yeah.
It is what
giant,
it is.
Biggest, fastest guys that
I've ever seen.
Created.
100%. You know, a Ryan Tucker, who was a Cleveland Brown forever. Ryan Tucker is just Ryan Tucker. Like Ted Washington. Ted Washington was 6'5", 380 pounds. That's just a genetic anomaly. These guys are monster humans. And I think with CrossFit kind of was the spark to this phenomenon, and then social media perpetuated it because the 4-minute mile boundaries disappeared.
Right,
because all of a sudden, when you get that much information from around the world of people doing stuff, all of a sudden you can't lie to yourself anymore. And so, yeah, you could talk a little bit about drugs and a little bit about peptides, and for sure that's an issue. But I think when you really get to the nuts and bolts of it, it's kind of like the NFL argument. Because there's no more limitations to what people are perceiving in their brain, I think that's why there's a massive explosion in strength.
Yes.
Like, people are just getting strong because you can't be weak. Because if you're like, no woman will ever deadlift 500 pounds.
Yeah. Now I got a girl in my gym getting close.
Yeah, it's like getting close,
like,
right? And you're like, you got Steffi Cohen, you got all these people who I haven't even met. I don't know Steffi.
Yeah.
Never met her. But I know everything about her training because of social media.
Yeah.
So I can't go to a female athlete equivalent and tell her never again. Oh, that'll never happen. Your 315 is fantastic, right? And it's still fantastic. But if her goal is to be the strongest in the world, it's not.
Yeah.
And so I think the expectations changed a lot. I remember my ex-wife in 2006 competed at junior nationals, and she deadlifted 410. At the time, as a 150-ish pound lifter, it was a national record. And she was a volleyball player here at Ashland that made the transition to powerlifting for a couple of years. And now that's kind of standard.
Yep.
It's operating business, you know? And she was the best of the best for that day.
I remember hearing about Danny Wolber when I was coming up, when I was competing. You know, he could deadlift 900 pounds. It was so unheard of, you know. Now they're everywhere. Guys are, you know, the strongman guys are taking it close to 1,100 pounds, and it's like 900 doesn't seem so tough, but it's because they got to see other people doing it.
They got it.
I've got a kid in my gym who probably weighs 170 pounds, and he lifted a 350 Atlas stone.
Really?
But the reason was because all the guys in our gym are bigger guys, but we all lift 300 plus, 400 plus pound Atlas stones. And he was like, well, I can do it if they can do it.
100%.
And that's what Instagram did for everybody.
How crazy is that, right? It's, you know, Charles used to talk about this a lot, and he had a theory on it. But, for example, they realized in early civilizations that around roughly the same time on two different parts of the globe, the bow and arrow was created.
I was just listening to Rogan's podcast with the guy the other day who wrote the Comanche book. I'm reading it right now.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
I know the one, but I haven't read it either.
Yeah, I'm listening to an audio. But go ahead. That's we were just thinking about that.
Yeah, and he used to talk about that a lot. And he had a term for it, and I'm not keen enough on the term yet to know it. But basically, the concept is at the same time, on two parts of the earth, something is typically discovered simultaneously. An example of that in my personal life, the day that I broke the Canadian record in the hammer, it was a 27-year-old record. I broke it only to receive a phone call that Jim Stacey in Lethbridge on that same day broke it.
Yeah.
I just got the bump by 3 centimeters. And it's like, okay, what's the chances of us both doing it simultaneously after a 27-year drought?
I saw the same thing with the 56-pound weight in Highland Games. Same weekend.
Two guys.
Yep.
So
both broke 49 feet.
Maybe me and Jimmy are twin flames, right?
Who knows?
Yeah. So, but it's really strange, right? It makes no sense, but it happens. And I think because of the social media wall breaks that down, I think what we're getting exposed to is the same kind of thing, but at an exponential rate. Like we're getting people that instead of being like, every 27 years a great performance and something's going to happen, it's like every day.
Yeah.
It's just it's accelerating. It's almost like we're our own artificial intelligence at this point, where we're progressing exponentially. Now, will some people get burnt out or broken off along the way? Yeah, of course. There's always going to be some cannon fodder to progression, and that sucks, but it is what it is. But you're seeing it in every sport. You're seeing, like, because I also exist in the alpine skiing world, the things that free riders are doing in the pipe, the Shaun Whites of the world on a snowboard, that stuff defies what is thought to be humanly possible 5 years ago.
Right.
And now kids, there was a girl at the time, I think she was 10 or 11 years old, from like Czechoslovakia, was already a sponsored Red Bull free riding superstar, because she could do stuff that you're like, okay, when I was 11, I was still playing in the mud, you know? And this girl's doing, triples in a pipe on a pair of skis.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Look what's happening in the men's shot put right now.
Undeniable example. Undeniable.
Well, obviously, I've never seen anything like it. I just can't believe it.
It doesn't make sense. Like, I remember after the Worlds when Kovacs won, and they took the top 3 performances, then they took the top 8, and they compared it basically across the board to every track and field performance, and said, okay, this is what would happen in pole vault, or 100 meters or long jump, to be the equivalent of the type of performance that just occurred in the shot. And it was like Usain Bolt. There would have been multiple Usain Bolts competing in the shot put that day, and they all would have had their best performances, and they all would have been at world record pace. And the fact that that happened, and the fact that it kind of happened without it being perfectly predictable, shows the rate of, in my opinion, the rate in which things are changing. Because it's almost like parts of our brain, our DNA or something, are starting to get activated by what's happening, to the point where we're not even sure it's going to happen. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, how did that occur? That almost seemed like we watched a mutation occur live.
Yeah.
Because next year it's not going to go back to what it was.
No.
These guys are going to find another gear. And these other guys behind them are like, oh, hold on a second. I have to do what? Oh, I got that.
Yeah.
Right?
You can do it. Why can't I do it?
Yep. And I think it's almost like we're watching real world mutation of our physical ability. Or maybe we are capable of unspeakable achievement, and it's our brains that are now starting to accept it.
What's 75 feet?
What's 75 feet? There's a guy from the UK, former military, and I won't say his name because I can't remember it, to be honest. But he's a high mountain pioneer, expedition leader. And he put together an expedition that Jimmy Chin, who created Free Solo, the director, was speaking about, I think, in the New York or something like this. They asked him about this UK climber, because he took the world's greatest peaks and he summited them all in 7 months.
Wow.
And he also has the world record for an Everest summit, I think, in 5 hours. This guy is another level.
Yeah.
He was a guy that the story was about. He summits Everest, comes down on the same day, comes down from Everest, summits, comes down, then goes back up to save hikers, and then does a heli rescue all in the same day. So when you look at that type of mental fortitude, or you just take Alex Honnold, who free climbs El Capitan, like you look at
scariest movie ever.
You know the end, and you still get uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So when you look at all of that, and you look at like Jimmy Chin, who is like documented most of it, and you hear what they're saying, it's nobody thought it was possible a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. You're insane for even thinking it. And now all of a sudden, it's not only is it possible, but it's been achieved, and now they're starting to look to greater attempts of stuff.
These endurance races, these 200-mile, 250-mile, these didn't exist 15, 20 years ago,
You take someone like Cam Hanes.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so you got Cam Hanes, who's
not built to do that either.
No, at the end of the day, if you're to be really honest about Cam Hanes, he's a mid-level build. So 150 to 170. He's found a way through perseverance, are basically repetitive perseverance of the same thing to get good at something.
Yeah.
He's in his 50s, you know. Maybe it's the elk meat, but,
Yeah.
you know, what his true skill is he is clearly a one percenter athletically in the skill of bow hunting.
Mm-hmm.
So he probably would have been a good pitcher, good something, some sort of hand skill, probably would have been a good hockey playing goalie.
Yeah.
Like there would have been another sport that he would have been exceptional at if they had put him on that path. But for some reason, he found bow hunting and then becomes an endurance athlete as an aside to bow hunting. One is as a byproduct. So we know that Cam Hanes is doing all these great things. Enough about that. The part that is phenomenally interesting to me is how fast the influence is through social media on people that would have never gone for a jog in their life.
Absolutely.
And now all of a sudden, we got guys running, just running the same way that CrossFit got people CrossFitting. Yeah. There's videos coming into his site every single day of people just smashing runs. Yep. And you're like, is it that simple?
Well, just looking at guys like Cameron Goggins, this year I started running, and it was like
me too.
Yeah,
but I had to start coming downhill first. Right? Like it was crazy.
But that's, I looked at guys like Goggins and Cam Hanes, and I'm like, if they can run 200 miles, I can run a 5K. You know, 100%. So let's do it.
About 3 months ago, maybe 2 months ago, before the snow hit us up in Mammoth, I was doing this hike up to Crystal Lake. And then one day I was like, hey, you know, and I've had the Achilles and shit, so I was really cautious. And then on the way down, I'm like, I'm going to just like do a little jog on a switchback. Yeah. So I jogged the switchback. And then next time I did it, I jogged a few switchbacks. And then eventually I found myself kind of running down. Mm-hmm. And it was a weird moment because I'd done a shitload of assault bike and ski ergs because that's what I could do, and it was easy on my Achilles. And I'd had decent metabolic performances on that. But there was something about running that made me feel good. The assault bike doesn't make me feel good. And
you get done and it's like you did something.
You did something. And when I was done with that run down, I was kind of like elevated mentally. I felt like good about whatever it was I just did. Mm-hmm. I didn't even get a runner's high. I'm not talking about getting into oxygen debt. Right, I don't know what that is. Right? So it was something more about the feel of it, the motion. I had clear thought. I could think about stuff. I came up with conceptual stuff while I was running down where I'm like, I'm out of my head right now. This is interesting. I don't get out of my head on the assault bike. I'm so in the moment of exertion that even if I'm not pushing high RPM or pushing high threshold lactate, I'm still in a place where I'm like, I'm riding a bike, right?
Whereas looking at that clock.
Looking at the clock. Yeah, like I have to like put something over it to even get through the longer ones I was doing. Whereas jogging down, my head was clearing out. Yeah. And when I was finished, I was like, oh shit, maybe there's something about this that is way more primal than I'm aware of. And I just ignored because I thought it was bullshit while I was throwing stuff around, you know?
We talked about earlier about simplicity and basics, and that's one of those things that I looked at when I started designing how I was going to start training now. But grappling and running and lifting odd objects and getting in these metabolic states where your heart rate's just racing and then when you get done, you get that feeling of accomplishment.
Right.
Never walked out of the gym having squatted a big weight, feeling absolutely exhausted and feeling. It was cool, and I knew it was part of my training to throw far, but I never felt like I just really accomplished something worthwhile, you know? And you go home and you can have a good-sized meal and not feel like you're a dickhead and, relax on the couch because you just did something incredibly hard and you just have this inherent feeling that you did good by yourself.
Right. Yeah, it's funny that you say that because I think of all the years I spent in the weight room. And what I found in particular is I never felt lighter leaving. Mm-hmm. Even when the days were amazing, and it wasn't that they weren't amazing. Fuck, I love the way it felt to move big weight and to have that. But I never left it there. Mm-hmm. I always took the weight room with me. There's something about it that's kind of funny. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I always took it with me. And I found when I started doing these like aggressive hikes and these semi jogs down, I would get back to the truck and I'd find myself just at ease. I would just sit for 5-10 minutes and be completely content.
Yes, yes, that's perfect word for it.
Yeah, and it was a very weird awakening, and it made me kind of want to keep doing it more and
Yeah.
more. So then I started snowshoeing and started doing this. Skiing will make me feel that way. But I've been skiing for so long that I don't know how to explain skiing to people that don't ski, because I didn't experience it because it was like learning a second language when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So I can't remember the shitty.
Sure.
Right?
You're Canadian.
Yeah,
Don't you come
exactly.
equipped with
Come
skis?
equipped. Yeah, you get like skis or a hockey stick.
Right.
You got to choose, right? It's a red or blue pill when you're like 4. So I chose the skis, and so I can't remember learning to ski in the sense of the frustration. I remember skiing at a young age. So for me, skiing is like running for a lot of people. There's like an empty space that occurs, and when I take my boots off at the end of the day, I know that I had an experience that was very fulfilling.
Yes.
But I find I can get that running down that hill in the same 30 minutes that took me all day to do
Yeah.
on skis. And I'll get to the car and be like, I could do fuck all the rest of the day, and I will have achieved what I needed to
Yeah.
achieve. And that's a weird sensation, because the weight room doesn't necessarily give me that. You know, I've had a lot of days where I've finished lifting weights and been like, I don't really feel any different, you know?
Yeah.
And it just is what it is.
I totally get that.
You know?
And now I'm such a pussy when it comes to cold weather that it's like getting, man, I don't want to run in this. I'll go to the gym and hit a really hard metabolic workout. It's not the same.
It's not
the same.
It is. It is different. So, you know, and I've talked about this a little bit with my Instagram. I'm like, if you're a bigger athlete, because I'm still on the way down, like I'm probably still in the 250s. And so when I explain to people, I'm like, in the beginning, you may not be able to run every day. You know, like Cam can run every day.
Yeah.
Cam's built up the tolerance. That's what he is, you know. But you just have to be smart. You run some, you cycle some, you ski erg some, you even elliptical some, and then you run again. And in the beginning, it will kind of sort itself out. And the next thing you know, you go from running Tuesday, Thursdays to Monday, Wednesday, Saturdays. And then the next thing you know, you're going to be okay. But especially as former power athletes and big guys, yeah, you're going to feel it if you try to. It's painful.
Yeah.
It's probably as painful as it must have been to those people that we used to wonder what their problem was the first time they ever did 20 rep squats.
Yeah.
Right? You're just like, what do you mean you can't walk for 2 days? That's
Yeah.
ridiculous,
Yeah.
right? Well, you know, running may have the same effect on your cardiovascular fatigue, and that's something that comes with it too. The things people don't realize: mitochondria usage, and mitochondria usage of the heart, and like just the essential fats, the CoQ10s that the heart needs to be able to do that high metabolic work. You may find that you go into a suppressed, not so much CNS state, but a suppressed like respiratory state after those initial training. When you're a big power athlete that makes that push into metabolic worlds, a lot of people don't think about that, but you're like, I feel fine, but I'm so tired, coach. And you're like, buckle up. No, you exhausted your respiratory state. Your heart is tired because your heart is weak, right? And it's not weak in the sense of a health standpoint. You'll pass every metric the doctor's going to give to you, but it's weak to run.
Sure. It's not used to this.
It's not used to this.
Develop like anything else.
Yeah, it's a muscle that isn't used to that level of exertion, and it has to restore, and it's a different system that restores. So I always tell people, it's like, you may feel extreme fatigue in a weird, like a deep hurt inside your soul when you start that higher metabolic work.
Yeah.
Where you're like, I've been tired for 3 days. I think I'm sick. And it's like, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think your internal system basically threw some alarms, gave you a huge endorphin burst, so you felt amazing after your first run, and now you need to rest.
Yeah.
Right? So you have to kind of balance that out. But once you get through that, the body, and I find you get through it pretty quick compared to lifting introductions. I think moving, running, walking, jogging is more genetically
Makes
natural.
sense to our body.
Yeah. That your body's like, okay. And I find if you really have to lose body weight, and I never would have recommended this 10 years ago, if you really have to lose weight and your diet's on mark, but something's missing, it's probably because you don't have the metabolic system available to metabolize enough caloric, right? So I always tell people, it's like, if you really have to start dropping pounds, and you're doing elliptical, you're doing treadmill, and everyone used to blame it on the treadmills as dirty electricity and all this bullshit. And it's like, no, I just don't think you're working hard enough in that regard. You have to get to a state, and it can't be just these 10-minute bursts all the time. You have to get up to a state where you can metabolically induce stress on your system for an hour.
Yes.
For 2 hours even. There's something about that that's distinctly different to the body.
We did a workout this year, and like I said, this is the first year I've been getting into this. So this summer, I teamed up with a guy, Mike Jeremiah from our gym, who's a former, I think he was like number 4 in the world in the Spartan race. He was
just full on.
Yeah, he's very Cam Hanes like.
Yeah, so like a Rudy Reyes.
Exactly. Yeah, just an animal. Yeah. And we decided we were going to do this workout. We were going to run 4 miles, hit the rower for 5,000 meters, and then swim 800 meters all in the same time.
That's legit.
It was legit, and it scared the crap out of me.
Right.
And we're thinking about it. I'm thinking about it for a week. He could care less. He was fine. But then we started out, and we're starting to run together, and I said, don't wait for me. You go, and I'll catch up with you.
Yep.
He was gone. But it was an hour-long fight, and the run hurt, and the rower, as anyone's been on the concept too knows, hurt, and the swim was just
misery.
Ridiculous.
Yep.
And if I would have been in the open water, I would have drowned. Because every once in a while I have to grab the side of the pool, and you know,
it would have been shark bait.
But it was an hour-long, just death march that I felt so good after. You know,
it's strange, right? So with Megan, she's lived up at altitude the last 10, 15 years. She's ski coach, all those things, mountaineer. And so when I started spending a lot of time with her normal, like for example, 2 different times in her life, she summited 3 14,000-foot peaks in a day, right? The first time was at the age of 33. She did the highest peak in North America as one of the 3, right? Wow. From they started at 2 a.m., they finished at 5 p.m., crushed them. Then she did it last summer. She races Leadville, a 100-mile mountain bike race on a whim, and then crushes 3 14ers, because she was bored, I think. So that was kind of like, I'm looking at her as like, holy shit, how do I hang with this? And so I started slow, right? Mm-hmm. And I started creeping into it. And I know for her, my hikes were her walks, right? Like for her, it was not stressful. And then this year, we did a hike that was all over 10,000 feet. And I felt good. I was having a conversation with another hiker. We knock it out. It's 5 miles round trip, or it was 8 miles round trip. I get back, and I'm like, man, that was good. I felt like my pace was good. And I got all my stats back from all my heart rate information. And I was talking to Ryan Family about this. I was in zone 5, 165, 170 heartbeat for 48 minutes, right, of this time period. And we were out there for, it was 8 miles, roughly 2 miles an hour. So we're out there 4.5 hours. And if you had asked me to do that 3 years ago, I know the exact effect it would have had. I would have had an anxiety attack because the sensation of my heart rate and my breath used to make me feel like I was suffocating. Yeah. And I would have anxiety moments. And it showed up for the first time doing jiu-jitsu and Krav Maga one time where I was like, I thought I was having an panic attack. And I realized I had over-exceeded threshold for my metabolic system, and I thought I was going to die. And so when I looked at that information, I'm like, how did I not perceive this exertion? I'm like, oh, this is interesting. This is such a quantum leap from where I was 5 years ago that I can't even compare the 2 athletes anymore. And so when I started to look at it that way, I realized that a lot of it was just integration and time. But what was fascinating about it was the amount of exertion that you do in that time period and the way that affects your metabolic system. It's almost, and I don't want to give people false information, so I can only give experience information, but it damn near feels like you're in a metabolic caloric debt for a day, not an hour. Yeah. It feels like you could push through 2 days of higher caloric intake, especially if it's quality food, just from that one huge exertion.
Yes. I felt that.
Yeah.
My diet is primarily carnivore, not because of any that I think vegetables are bad for you. It's how I digest food better.
Yeah, sure.
I don't feel like I, got gas pains or anything. That's just the way. And I do eat vegetables on occasion. But when I get done with that workout we did with the 4 mile run and everything, I want to eat.
Yes.
I want to eat because I feel like I mean, and I feel like if I did that every day, I could eat like an animal every day
Yes.
and still be fine, you know?
It's funny that you make that point, because I remember when Matt Vincent and I were first talking about when he started to lose the weight initially.
He cannot eat like he should just be eating grass in his backyard and just running on a treadmill constantly.
Constantly, right? So he said he couldn't eat over 2,500 calories a day. Couldn't do it. He said if he ate over 2,500, he'd start to gain fat again. And I remember hearing, I'm like, that's interesting. I'm like, you're kind of onto something that a lot of big guys of the power world struggle with. It's partially their digestive system got so destroyed from the party eating, right? And the party eating is just anything that tastes good, you ate it. That calorically, their metabolic systems are broken and digestive systems are broken. So first thing he did is started eating a ketogenic diet and getting rid of a lot of stuff, and he started losing weight. But even then, he couldn't push the caloric uptake even on a keto diet because he started gaining weight again. And I see that all the time with former power athletes, and I think it's a digestive issue. That's what I believe. Without any testing or medical knowledge, it's basically you're not breaking down food, so you put in your 1,000-calorie meal and it just kind of sits in there and ferments, and then a few hours later you put in another 1,000-calorie, and now your body's like, what do I do with this 2,000 calories? So I think there's a digestive issue that heals over time when you get rid of the processed and bad foods. But as a perfect example, in correlation to, Matt was a 290 guy down to a 240 guy, Cameron Haynes is 150s to 170s or wherever he is in that range, and he just was talking about the fact that for him, calories are a simple math equation. He eats 5,000 calories to gain weight, 4,000 or something like that to lose weight, and it's like beef and rice or beef and vegetable, beef and maybe sweet potato. Super simple, super clean food. And you're like, okay, so this little dude who has all the muscle on his body combined isn't even 3/4 of Matt Vincent's muscle mass, is eating twice as many calories. That math actually doesn't make sense. Matt's physiological capability for thermal effect of food should be, if it was just nuts and bolts, should be 5,000 to 7,000 based on muscle mass. So how is that possible? And you realize that there's just that metabolic demand of what Cam's doing. That's a game changer. So now you take athletes that are a little bit bigger. You take a Klokov size athlete, or you take these wrestlers that are 105 kilo guys, like that's my favorite weight class of lean athlete on the planet, 105 kilos. I think that's the perfect size for everything. And you take those guys, and if they're lean and their metabolic output is high, their caloric requirement is massive, right? You take like some of these Georgian wrestlers that are like 100 kilos or 220 pounds, I would have to assume they're in the 6, 7, 8,000 calorie range if they're not cutting, just to be able to maintain those high metabolic training sessions. And that, to me, I think is the key. I think the vast majority of people that get stuck in the concept of not being able to lose weight are not, even if their diet's perfect, they're just not really training hard enough.
Wow. That's, it's a little bit of common sense, you think, but people don't say it very often, right?
No, there's especially because we saw it in the Poliquin world. We saw people that tried to manipulate composition 100% through nutrition, but they were also anti-cardio. So Charles was anti-cardio, hated it, right? These guys. So in a guy using a lot of gear with a certain genetic uptake, he didn't have to do cardio. He strict keto diet or carnivore/vegetable-based paleo diets, and they would get really lean and put on a lot of muscle mass. Couldn't run around the block, but they put on a lot of muscle mass. But the average got somewhere stuck in the middle because they couldn't lose weight, they couldn't put on muscle mass, and then eventually what you have to explain to them is you're not in good enough shape to tolerate the minimum volume requirement for hypertrophy. And that is a weird thing to tell someone, because they're like, but I'll lose my gains. No, you're not in good enough shape to have gains, right? You can't do 10 sets of 10. You can't actually complete it, so you're not in good enough shape. How can you tolerate volume without conditioning? You can't, and you can't lift yourself into it, right? So it's like people are like, but why are these Georgian wrestlers and these Chinese weightlifters so fucking muscular? And it's like, well, the wrestlers, it's because they can tolerate volume.
Insane volume,
and it's not happening in a weight room. They're doing so much work. And these other national team athletes, even in something as specific as weightlifting, is because their cumulative day of training is huge.
3 sessions a day.
3 sessions, stretching,
hours.
core work, all that other stuff is separate from the weight room sessions. So you take their cumulative day and you're like, oh yeah, that guy worked out 6 hours today.
And I was in there for 45 minutes.
And I went in and did a 45-minute arm blaster, 6, 12, 25 workout, and I can't figure out why I'm not gaining any muscle mass. Well, it's because you're fucking shitty.
Yeah.
Like, you just haven't grasped the fact that you're massively undereducating yourself and what is necessary for success, you know?
Yeah. You get someone going, yeah, we got to break this down. You're going forever.
Yeah.
But yeah, you get the normal people who just don't understand how hard you need to train to get to those levels. And Instagram sometimes, like we talked about, makes it seem like, oh, he did his hour workout today. That's why he's gigantic, or that's why he's so strong. It just doesn't.
No.
It doesn't compute.
No, and I think where we were lucky to get that kind of broken off at an early age is Arnold Schwarzenegger worked out for 3 hours a day.
Yeah.
Right or wrong, it doesn't matter. So we knew that, okay, if Dorian Yates is a 1 hour guy and Mike Metzer is a 45-minute guy, but this guy Arnold is 3, well, that's a pretty big variance.
Yeah.
Right? So we knew that, you know, unless you were somehow figured out how to do heavy duty perfectly in the Mike Metzer era, you're not going to be successful under 45 minutes minimum. Mm-hmm. And if someone actually showed you Mike Metzer, you would have realized there was this extensive warm-up, and that 45 minutes was actually working time.
Yeah,
right? It wasn't the total workout. It's like Dorian. His working time of actual stress was 45 minutes. Arnold's working time of stress might have only been 45 minutes too. He was just in there for 3 hours. So once you got through all those like levels, you're like, okay, I'm going to have to put in some time.
Yeah.
Some real time. And when you start to realize that, you know, all of a sudden the 25-minute CrossFit workout, that's not going to cut it.
Mm-mm.
It's not. So especially if you're trying to actually change tissue, it's a process. And the process is using the most load possible for the most volume that you can tolerate.
Pretty simple.
I think so.
Hey, I want to thank you for doing this. This has been fantastic. Next time you're in town, let's do it again.
For sure. That'd be awesome.
We'll sit here and talk for another 2 hours. All right. This has been Derek Woodske. This has been The Refined Savage. See ya.